Rachel Watkyn set up sustainable packaging business, the Tiny Box Co., 14 years ago, secured investment from Dragon's Den, and today employs over 90 people and turns over 10 million in revenue. Rachel has since gone on to launch 2 other businesses in packaging, as well as a unique marketplace business off the back of the pandemic. We're going to get the inside story tonight on how it all unfolded. Please give a very warm welcome to the multi-award-winning, dragon-slaying entrepreneur, Rachel Watkyn.
Hello.
Hello. How was that for an intro?
Oh,
Is that all right?
Yeah, you make me sound very grand.
Well, welcome. It's so nice to have you here. And is that all working okay? Good?
I think so.
Well, great. So what I like to do with these interviews is to start off with learning a little bit more about you as a person. So let's put the business aside for a second. Let's talk about who Rachel is, where you grew up. I really want to know the story. So first of all, tell us about your experience in education. Where did you go to school? What was that like? Did you like it?
Oh, I was a swad. So, just to clarify, my parents were not bad people. They were just really bad parents. Okay. Not everyone is born with that skill. I had 3 parents, as you do.
Wait, elaborate.
So I was the result of my mum having an affair when she was married, and then it all came to light that I was clearly from an affair because they were all very dark and I wasn't.
Okay.
So my stepdad, who was married to my mum, sort of said that he would take me in, but it went horribly wrong and I ended up in care.
Okay.
Came out of care, and basically the 3 parents raised us. But it was a bit like a cult because there was no aunts, there was no uncles, no cousins, no friends. They all had mental health issues, and as a result there was no rules. So my education was 9 different schools.
Oh my gosh.
My record was 6 weeks in one high school before being moved to the next. Lived in 13 different houses. The parents just kept moving, all 3 of them.
Wow, okay. Well, we've gone very deep very quickly, everyone. I hope you're ready. I hope you've had a couple of drinks. Okay, so you moved different schools. What was how do you remember school? Did you enjoy it? Like, was there any subjects that you loved?
So, my childhood was so bizarre that there was no rules, as I say, or the rules that apply in society didn't apply to us. And what I mean by that is when you're brought up, you know where you fit in society, whether you're working class, middle class, that kind of thing. We lived in a caravan and I went to private school.
That's confusing, yeah, okay.
I spent some time at boarding school, and every time it was until the parents ran out of money or went bankrupt again, and then I would go to a state school and then back to private school. And so that was my experience. There was no consistency.
Right, okay. And so, and what about, do you remember your first job? Like, where was your first memory of working?
Well, my first memory of working I'll come on to later. My second memory of working was in a fish and chip shop.
Okay.
I was 14. I was forced out to work because the parents had gone bankrupt again, and I'm allergic to fish and seafood. So, so I was literally dropping the fish in the fryers, you know, just praying not to have an allergic reaction.
Oh my God.
I needed the money.
Wow. Okay. And how long did you have to work there for?
About 6 months, and then I got a job waitressing. And a massive.
Survived it. Nothing happened.
I survived it. Yeah. Massive pay rise. I went from £1.50 to £2 an hour.
So was it waitressing? You said. The
Yeah.
second one. Okay. And what was the first one? What was the first ever?
The first ever one was, I was really like an entrepreneur. I discovered at like age 7, 8 that I could get a job strawberry picking. And because I had small hands, the owner of the farm, I mean, you just wouldn't get away with it now, but the owner of the farm would come and pick me up in his minibus, and I'd go and work in the field all day, pick one, eat one, pick one, eat one. But I got paid per punnet. So I had my own little entrepreneur business going, and from age 7 to 8, I did it every summer.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, so you got that experience pretty early on.
Yeah.
So, okay, I feel like we've already covered like so much of Rachel's life in the last minute. So obviously you've had a very interesting childhood, we say. How do you think all of those experiences and the inconsistency and all of that has shaped who you are today? How's that built towards your character?
I think that one of the things that's worked in my favour massively, in such a bizarre way, is that I don't know how to conform. My first job, I was working for a software company, my first like proper job, and this was Sage, and the MD said to me one day, the problem with you, Rachel, is you don't know how to conform. And he was right, because there was no conformity. But actually, when you're running your own business, you need that ability to go against what everybody else is saying.
Absolutely, yeah, okay, interesting. So, and I feel like this is going to theme into the rest of your story as well. So your first taste of entrepreneurship, I guess, is the strawberry picking.
Yep.
Did you have any other businesses as you were growing up? Was there any little things that you started?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, I cottoned on really quickly that lots of neighbours and friends would happily give away their bric-a-brac. So I'd go and collect it, and then I'd set up my stall selling their bric-a-brac. I did that from about 11, 12.
Did you enjoy it? Was that like fond memories?
I liked the money.
Okay.
I used to convert the money into chocolate bars.
Nice. Because it's always interesting to ask people like, what was your drive? Like some people like creating things, and actually a lot of the entrepreneurs you read about, you know, like Richard Branson and all that kind of stuff, that they were like, okay, I was really driven to figure out how to make money, and that's what drove you.
Yeah, it was all about, I used to convert all my money to sweets, and I would count my sweets and measure my wealth.
Okay, great. Brilliant. And so tell us what happened between that kind of stage of your life to then starting Tiny Box Co. You worked in a couple of corporate jobs then, and you were doing jewellery for a little while, is that right? Yeah,
so somehow, don't ask me how, I managed to pass my A-levels and went to university. And then my first graduate job was with John Lewis.
What did you study at university?
Business studies, majoring in finance. And working for John Lewis, my God, what an eye-opener. I mean, lovely company, but that was real conformity. You started at 9, you finished at 5:30, you did exactly what they told you to do in that time. And they made it clear that you were paid to do the job and not think. And it was soul destroying. And I was like, if this is my working career, I'm done, age 22.
Wow, okay. And so did you want to leave that and start your own thing? Is that what you were thinking?
I lasted a year to the day because I was on the management training scheme, and then luckily got work in software and a much more forward-thinking company, and ended up travelling the world doing that. And it was while I was travelling the world that I realised that I wanted to be making it a better place by creating my own company.
Was there anything that in particular that sparked it? Obviously, I think a lot of people that go travelling end up coming back with something like that, don't they? Was there anything in particular that happened?
I was working in Sierra Leone, as you do, and it was at the time, I don't know if anyone's seen the film Blood Diamonds, but there was a coup going on. It was incredibly dangerous. There was roadblocks everywhere. Little naive Rach in my little business suit goes out there thinking, oh, this will be fun. It was incredibly dangerous. But the point was that I was hired to build a finance system to stop the fraud that was going on at government level.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And which I did. And the EU were pumping millions and millions of dollars into Sierra Leone, where most of the ministers were creating fictitious pay lists of their payroll.
Right, okay.
And siphoning off the money.
Yeah.
So we built the system, it stopped the fraud, but I realised that the level of corruption and all the money that we think that we're donating to third world is not actually getting to the people. And it was then that I said, okay, I want to set up a very early fair trade type business and make a difference.
Okay, and is that when you started the jewellery business?
That's when I got the idea together
Okay.
to start it all, and then unfortunately went for a appendix operation and it went horribly wrong. And actually I couldn't work for 4 years.
Oh, what did you do?
Well, I lost everything. I lost my house, I lost my job. And my parents actually managed to turn themselves around a lot and let me go and live with them. And I lost the fear, because when you lose everything, I literally did lose everything. I was like, well, I've got nowhere to go now, apart from by setting up my own thing. And to start with, I wasn't well enough to work full time. So I thought, well, if I set up my own business, I can dictate the hours and the terms. Yeah. And if I ever get back to full health, then I can potentially run with that. I never confessed that to the dragons.
Right, well, now we know. Okay, so you decided to start a business because that's the way that you can manage your time. And that's interesting, like that was your kind of, your way of getting your freedom to start a business, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it was the jewellery business, was the first one?
So I started off with the jewellery business, yeah. It was all fair trade jewellery, but designed in the UK, because I worked in Mombasa as well, and a lot of the fair trade products they needed some tailoring for the UK commercial taste. Mm-hmm. So we designed it here and then got it made in third world countries. Okay,
great. And then, and obviously that's, from what I understand, your packaging business came from you running the jewellery business. So what problems did you run into, and how did it lead to the packaging?
So rewind 14 years, and the packaging market, to me, coming from a software market, was incredibly old-fashioned. People used to send me quotes in the post. You know, it was like, everybody else is on email. And all of the manufacturers were saying, oh, you've got to have a minimum run of 1,000 units. Oh, it's 12 weeks. And I was like, I just want some jewellery boxes. Why is this so hard? And in the end, it was at the Spring Fair in Birmingham. I ended up just sitting on the floor, just going, fine, I'll do it myself. And that was the start.
Okay. So what, you just created the boxes yourself? You just got some
Started,
materials? What did you do?
Started sourcing them from around the world, where I knew that they were ethical, recycled. Yeah. I started with £4,000 worth of stock. Mm-hmm. Now, to put it into context, we've got about 2.5 million. Okay. Yeah, and that's how it started.
Okay, so you started making them for your own, kind of, you had the problem, made them for yourself.
Yeah.
And then was there a point that you realised that actually you should set that up as a business and start selling them, or it just naturally kind of happened?
No, pretty much straight away, because I said, well, if I've got this problem, there must be loads of other people that have as well. Mm-hmm. Just get chatting to people, and they said, yeah, we've got the same problem.
And so I'm really curious, when you started it, did you have this vision of you wanting to build it into a big company, or at the time were you just focused on that challenge?
I was just focused on solving a problem.
Yeah.
And trying to get back to some kind of normal existence of working part-time and being of value to society again, I guess.
Yeah. And so that first year of doing the packaging company, what was it like? Was it just you on your own? Did you quite quickly have to start growing it in, operations and team, or did it kind of take a slow start?
So we were actually talking about this at the weekend. It started with just me. I spent quite a few months in the British Library just sense checking that I wasn't having some kind of brain fart and that there was a need for it. And so I started building the website. I found an office that was also my warehouse, and started trading. And I was out in a shop in East Grinstead and bumped into this guy, Robin Banks, who was a famous DJ at the time, and he was out looking to buy a box.
Okay.
Yeah. The irony. And anyway, got chatting to him, and he'd basically had an accident where he'd had far too many drugs and drink one night, hijacked the radio station, broadcast a load of stuff he shouldn't have done, and got carted off the premises and sent to rehab.
Wow, okay.
So he came back from rehab, and that's when I met him in the shop, and he was like, Rach, I've got to get a complete change of career, I can't be in the public eye anymore. Can I come and work with you? So I was like, well, if you like, the job is, the whole point of it, or the ethos, is to make things a better place, so if I'm helping in some way, go for it. He lasted 6 weeks. He couldn't handle not being in the public eye because he'd been so famous.
Right, okay.
I mean, for the youngsters here, he did the Virgin Breakfast Show, and then he moved from there and did the Kiss Breakfast Show. So in his day, he was very well known. So yeah, working with me and not having his adoring fans. After about 6 weeks, he said that he was going to go to Australia and try and get his girlfriend back, who'd left him because of the whole drink and drugs and hijacking incident. And because he'd realised that he couldn't handle it, but he'd got himself in too deep, or thought he had, he applied to Dragon's Den and didn't tell me, because he thought that he'd be able to re-kickstart his career and find a replacement for him.
Wow, okay, I never knew this. Okay, great.
So the first I knew was when the BBC called me,
Yeah.
and luckily he was in the office that day, and they said, oh, we're phoning up doing our research, we've got your application, what do you want the money for? And I'm looking across the office at Christian, and he's just going, blag it, just make it up. So
you like it?
So blagged it, and that was how we ended up.
Okay, so you put in this application, then he left, and then did you go on with?
He came on,
went together, and he left.
And he left the day of the filming.
Okay.
Because he'd been back in the public eye. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, right. It's all piecing together. So let's talk about Dragon's Den. So how far in is Dragon's Den to when you started? Is it?
So I started trading 2007, and then we did Dragon's Den 2008.
Okay, so pretty early on.
Yeah.
And at that point, were you generating revenue already, and like?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for everybody, I don't know, some of you might have seen that episode. Tell us what happened, like the key highlights. How were you feeling beforehand?
So it was filmed at Pinewood Studios, made to look like a dungeon, but it's not at all. And they filmed us walking up the steps or going into the lift, and actually that was all just filmed. It didn't really happen because it was all on one floor. But what they do is they stick you in a green room with a BBC rep, and you are not allowed to leave the premises or do anything without your rep to ensure that you don't try and see the dragons before the show or try and influence anyone in any way.
Okay.
So the day of the filming, we get there at the crack of dawn, they coat the makeup on and do your hair and everything, and then off you go to the green room and wait to be called. So we sat there all day. And then about 7 o'clock in the evening, they said, sorry, we've overrun, you'll have to come back.
Oh no! Okay.
So you psych yourself up for it, and so about 10 days later we went back. It was a boiling hot day, and we got on about 5 o'clock in the evening, and by then, what had they done to my hair? It had just got bigger and bigger and bigger in the heat, just this massive frizz ball, makeup all run off down my face.
Did you get to speak to the other entrepreneurs from that were filming that day as well? You completely isolated on your own?
We got to speak to the other entrepreneurs before they went in. Okay. After they'd been in, they then got sent somewhere else. So you couldn't say how was it or anything like that.
And were you nervous? Is this the kind of thing that you kind of enjoy? How are you feeling?
So we were talking about this earlier actually. My business partner at the time, Robin, was a presenter by profession. So he said to me, it's really important you don't get nervous. Even if you feel nervous, don't let it show because you'll hear it in your voice. And
that make you feel confident?
So you really can't be nervous. And actually the first clip you see of the episode is Robin starting, and he's going, and the cameras just pan around to me, just looking at him like, what's up with him? So I was wired, but I wasn't nervous.
And was it what you imagined it would be in the sense of like, because obviously these things I never like what they seem like on TV.
Yeah.
Did you watch some to prep and stuff like that?
Stupidly, no. I kind of saw a couple of them, but didn't really watch them in detail. And I naively thought that once you're in front of them, they'd be like nice, friendly, cuddly people. Big mistake. You walk in and it's sort of like, hi, and they all just look at you. There's no acknowledgement or anything. It's like, oh.
Right.
this is a bit daunting, and you're not allowed to take any props or paperwork with you.
Okay.
So, you know, you often see on the show that people have forgotten their numbers or their business plan. They do know it because the BBC rep that you're with drums it into you.
Okay.
But it's because you've got no tools to memorise or anything.
Got you. Okay. Right. So they're really putting you under pressure.
Yes.
It's better entertainment. Okay. And so did you go in there wanting to get investment, or did you do it for?
Oh no.
You were bothered?
As soon as Robin told me I'd come clean, you know, I said to him, well, we're not going to get investment. It's just not even on the table because we've got nothing patentable. I know nothing about packaging because my background is software. Gone into an industry that none of us know anything about, with no trading history, never run a business. So obviously we're never going to get investment, but a brilliant potential 10-minute marketing window. That was my view, and that was probably why I wasn't as nervous as I could have been.
Yeah, it wasn't like all riding on it.
No.
And just for, to share with everybody, I guess the main thing was that some of them thought that it was quite niche and it wasn't really going to be a big thing. And then, you know, essentially you foresaw a demand that they didn't at that point, right?
You know, the way that it comes across on TV of this sort of condescending and that was very much...
That was how they were...
Yeah, and it's a game, you know.
Yeah.
So they are playing a persona.
Yeah.
But the show cut us down to 10 minutes. We were in there for 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
And we were ripped to shreds, like literally, you know, taken to pieces, with Duncan Bannatyne saying that his children could make better boxes, and Robin, when he talks about his drug habit, you see Deborah Meaden's face and she's just going and I knew at that point we'd lost her. It's everything, all cards out on the table, and they really do rip you to pieces.
And how did it end up?
Theo was sitting on the fence. Peter said that I was investable, and that doing it with Robin was potentially investable, even though he left that day. And sort of said to Theo that they should do it as a joint venture, and Theo agreed, and somehow before I even knew what had happened, I'd agreed to them having 40% of my business. Hindsight is a wonderful thing.
It's interesting because on Dragon's Den a lot of the time people are forced to give away more of their business. They're like, oh, I'll give you that much for that much of your business, which in reality, investment's not usually like that, because the investors don't want to take 40% of your business because they basically would be buying half of it, wouldn't they? And it's taken away from your motivation. So I guess at that point it was quite early on, so I guess it was still not a good deal, I guess we can say that quite confidently, but did it help you get to somewhere that you wouldn't have if you didn't?
Well, let's put it into perspective. They paid £60,000 for 40%. The company, the last valuation was in excess of 15 million. I would say that they've had a pretty good return. After it was filmed, had a meeting very early on, and they said, they basically ripped the business to pieces. In an afternoon strategy meeting, and at the end of it they said, we're going to forward you the money and leave you to run the business. And I was left like, hang on a minute, I agreed because I didn't have enough self-belief and I wanted the mentoring. That was the only reason I went along with Robin's putting us up for it. So to then suddenly be told, well, you're not going to get any of that anyway, was a bit mind-blowing. But actually it's worked well. Yeah,
because you could just do your own thing.
Yeah.
And was there a point that you could have changed your mind at that point?
I could have done, I could have done and said, I'm not signing it, because on the TV it's just a verbal yes. And actually about 90% of them don't go through.
Right. Okay. So they haven't had any involvement since the money?
No.
No help?
That's not true. They have helped me when I've gone to them with a specific problem and said, I need help with this. 2018, we got hacked badly, and I didn't know what had happened, what had gone wrong, and luckily I built quite a good relationship with Theo's e-commerce head, And I phoned him up and I was like, I just don't know where to go with this. Help. And they did.
Yeah.
So the help's there if I've got specific problems.
Okay. And so you obviously giving away 40% of your business as the company's growing and things are going really well. Was there any point where you were kind of like, did that frustrate you at any point, or was it like it's really mattered by that point?
We joke now internally that we have HMRC tax and we have dragon tax. And, you know, I signed up for it. I agreed to it. That's the package. And what it gave us overnight was credibility. All right, I didn't get the mentoring I thought, but it gave us the credibility that people thought, well, okay, they're a startup, or, you know, still relative startup, but actually they're obviously trustworthy now, they've got that backing.
Yeah, and so, you know, typical question on this and probably easy to answer, but not always as realistic. So if you could go back and do it or not do it, what would you do?
That's a really hard question. I think that I would have looked at all the outcomes in more detail and sort of like, well, I should have haggled. I should have said, well, you know, give me some percentage back after 12 months or whatever, and looked at the different options. But because I never saw it on the table in the first place, I just hadn't. And I think that is one of the key learnings or teachings, if you like, in that you've got to get over your lack of self-belief and look at the what ifs, if this happens or if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right, let's move away from dragons. Let's talk about, so obviously the industry has changed quite a bit in the last decade, and you kind of looked at what the industry needed at the time. How has it changed? So did you initially look at your competitive landscape, or was it kind of just like, we need this, I'm doing it, and then how did that progress and change in the industry in terms of competitors and the needs of customers?
So going back to Dragon's Den,
Yep.
Deborah Meaden in the Den said to me, well, it's never going to be mainstream. Yeah. Your sustainable packaging is always going to be a niche market.
Okay.
And Duncan Bannatyne, Duncan Bannatyne, we saw him afterwards. We were talking to the Dragons off camera, and he came over, and I was expecting, I was like, hi Duncan, expecting a nice conversation. And he just went, if you get that money, I'm a Dutchman, and stalked off. His point being that he just couldn't see the market.
Wow, okay. So
because it wasn't there.
Yeah.
We were a disruptor, without a doubt. And now it's mainstream.
Yeah, because it's weird to think about now that is not mainstream, right?
Yeah.
And so with Theo and... what was the other? Peter that invested. Did they really see it then? Were they like, we see this?
No.
They
they just thought it was worth a punt.
Yeah, because it kind of shows if they didn't really want to get too involved from the beginning, they're like, oh, we'll just see what happens.
Yeah.
30%. Got it. Let's talk about what happened next. So, so you get the money, and at that point you get to start hiring people or growing a little bit. What was that transition like for you? So you start a company, you were obviously doing something before, and then suddenly you have to start managing people and growing infrastructure. What was that like?
What's that all about? When you do a business plan and you're putting all the numbers together, you're like, okay, when I get to this point, I'll need 50 people, and then here I'll need 100 people. And nowhere in anyone's business plan that I've ever seen does it talk about the psychology behind it, and that each employee has their own needs, wants, marriage breakdown, bankruptcy, childcare issues. That for me was the biggest learning curve, that people aren't numbers.
It's a really good point. It's such an obvious thing now that you say it, but you study business and you learn about how to grow a business, but not really. It's a people thing, right? So you have to learn about relationships and working with people.
In my whole business studies degree, we studied psychology and we studied business organisation structure, the bureaucratic company versus the organic, but no point did we actually talk about people and what to do if somebody comes into your office bawling their eyes out, and what to do if they say their husband's left them and they're going to kill themselves. Nobody teaches you that.
So learning on the job. Where did you go for support? What did you do to kind of develop yourself as a leader? Was there anything that you focused on?
I'm still learning. I'll let you know when I find out.
So on that point, was there anything that you were that you felt that you weren't very good at, or that you struggled with in the early days of the business that you have got really good at now? You know, like whether it's managing people in a certain way, or certain things around the business that you needed to know.
So I think this is going to sound crazy, but I think one of the hardest things that I struggled with at the start with people was I couldn't understand why they weren't all like me. So, well, why don't people want to come in really early for nothing and go home really late and work all weekend? And what do they mean they want a personal life? And why don't they mind if they're hired to do accountancy, but I ask them to work in the warehouse? What's the problem? You know, and that is something that I've really had to work on and understand that for the company to work, if they were all entrepreneurs, they wouldn't be working for me. So they have their own motivations and their own needs and wants. That's taken a lot of mastery.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, and so talking about challenges in business, what would you say was your worst moment in business to date? Take us to that moment and tell us the story.
Okay, probably my worst. If some of the audience may have experienced this, so we'll know exactly where I'm coming from. You know, part of your life cycle, unfortunately, is that you will lose your parents. That it's a given. But to lose a sibling at a relatively young age suddenly makes you start questioning everything around you. So go back 3 years, and I get the call from my sister to say that she's got terminal lung cancer, and there is no cure, and that she's got 3 to 6 months to live. And I was like, feck. You can't even begin to try and process that. But I had a hunch, and don't ask me where this hunch came from. I didn't know, but I said to my husband, she's got the same genes as me. I need to go and check that I'm okay. So we paid for me to have a full body scan, and 2 days later, they called me and said, you've got lung cancer.
Wow.
And the hardest thing in the business was me going, okay, I don't know if it's terminal. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to work again. So how do I make sure that everybody in the company is okay and that we can carry on with not being part of what I've built up, but I might be dead in a year, And that was definitely one of the hardest things. Now, touch wood. I was really lucky. They removed the bottom third of my lung, and I was back at work 6 weeks later.
She's been through a lot.
But I didn't know that, and we were waiting on the biopsy results. My poor husband, we got married knowing that I had lung cancer and knowing that I might be dying. And you just have to get on with it. But that was one of the hardest things, of the responsibility of where I leave everybody else.
Yeah, and of course it's a difficult personal thing. And then to have to think about all the business stuff, I guess it's something also to focus on in a way as well, that you, rather than, just focusing on, being upset, which you would be, of course.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Got me choked up a little bit. Don't know where I've got to. So I was going to ask you, I guess, like how you've been through all these different things that have affected you, and I know there's so many other things that have happened in the business that clearly, compared to that, are not the worst parts of business to date, but maybe we can touch on those where things have kind of fallen apart or things have gone wrong. What's your way of dealing with things? Like, what is your go-to thing that you do? You were in a crisis situation. I think you had some sort of, was it the flood? Like you had your warehouse flooded or something like that?
Yeah, we've had so many. I mean, I look back on the business and I think, were the heavens trying to tell me this is not the way to go? Because in the first couple of years, the warehouse caught fire and we lost a lot of stock. We had a flood that was so severe, I walked into the office and the chairs were floating. It wasn't It was literally floating. We got blacklisted from Google. I didn't even know it was a thing. Well, I just noticed one day that the website had disappeared. And it's just like, how could this even happen? And somebody had hacked into us, put in what is known as black hat tactics, which I didn't even know was a thing. And yeah, all this code over it that you couldn't see. So Google said that we were an indecent site and had removed us, but they don't tell you. It took us 3 weeks to work out what had happened. And then since then we had a much more serious hacking, another flood. We took on new premises, we were moving into the premises and we just watched a waterfall inside. And I think now, nothing phases me. People will come to me with another crisis and I've learned to just not be phased by it, I guess. You just build resilience.
Yeah. And what's your kind of, obviously you've been through things and you build up the resilience naturally. What would you recommend to people to get better at building resilience and just not being phased by things? Because I think it's one thing, you kind of look back and you say, right, how did I deal with that crisis? But it's your mindset in the moment that really determines what happens next, right?
For me, I think I've learned that I might have a mini tantrum. So for example, when COVID first hit and we were told, to send everybody home, I said to our accounts team, because by then we had quite a big team. So I said to our accounts team, okay, can you tell me what our cash burn rate is? So if we are shut down for 3 or 4 months, can we survive it? Do we have enough cash or do I need to start looking at, alternative scenarios? Because at that point, nobody knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And they said, oh yeah, it's fine, we will be fine for 5 months. Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Rach. And I was at home with my husband. And I just remember pacing the sitting room thinking something's not adding up. And I didn't know what it was. And then I suddenly said to my husband, I don't think that purchasing have talked to finance. And I think that purchasing have bought more stock that we are committed to, and therefore we don't have the cash. And I suddenly realised that we were £500,000 committed that wasn't in the cash flow.
Wow. So what did that mean for your burn rate then?
We could last about 2 months, if that.
Okay.
We were screwed.
And this is like beginning of pandemic time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I literally that day, like floods of tears, like it's all over. And my husband was just like, well, just put on your big girl pants. We've got to find a way out of it. Mm-hmm. And so it was then that started the brainstorming. Okay, well, how do we get ourselves out of this? Now, as it turned out, we were able to cancel or postpone a lot of the purchases, and we were fine. But by then, we'd already worked out that we needed to pivot the business. So we did. We set up a marketplace.
Right.
Because what we realised in the pandemic was a lot of our customers are cottage industry. And by the pandemic, a lot of them had lost their businesses because they sold at the fetes, craft fairs, Sunday markets, whatever. And suddenly they had no business. Mm-hmm. Even those that had sort of small online businesses on Etsy then had to go and queue in the post office, except that they weren't allowed out. And then it was queuing in the rain with the 2 meters apart and everything. So we said, well, we're really good at dispatch and fulfillment. So why don't we help all of our customers by saying, well, we'll come and pick up the products, we'll put them on our platform and market them for you, and then we'll dispatch them. So all you've got to worry about is just making them. And we got the website up in 5 weeks.
Amazing. And that's still going strong today?
Yeah.
And was there another business that you started in between that, or is that another?
We'd already started a manufacturing business.
Started one then? Okay. So, and manufacturing boxes?
Boxes, yeah.
And so, where you're at now, what percentage are you at in each business, like in terms of your time and?
Time and money are not the same thing.
Okay. So tell us time and tell us money.
Tiny Box is still the major breadwinner by a long way. The manufacturing is, it turns over about £1 million a year down in Cornwall, and that was an accident. A lot of them start as accidents, don't they? Where we wanted to get into manufacturing, we heard this business in Cornwall had gone into liquidation, so we were just going to nick the machinery, well, buy the machinery, but bring it back up to Sussex and start learning to make boxes. But we went down and met the team, and I think it was actually my husband that said to me, we can't do this to them. We need to help them get it back up and running, and turn it into a profitable business.
Right. Okay. And so now, obviously, because those are slightly earlier stage businesses in the marketplace, you spend a lot of time in that. Is that something that needs a lot of nurturing? It
does need nurturing, but actually, most of my time at the moment is on a new project.
Ooh, is it still in stealth mode? Is it secret?
It's not secret, no, but it's not in packaging.
Okay. Should we hear about it?
If you'd like to. Yes, please. It was another accident.
Okay, yes, tell us the story.
A friend of mine runs a equestrian clothing business, and that's for the humans, not the horses. But it's all made out of sustainable materials, recycled fishing nets, that kind of thing. But she was asking for investment. And we looked at the business model, and I started Googling, and I was like, hang on a minute, we're in 2020, but if I Google sustainable and ethical sportswear, all that comes up is newspaper articles about the best small brands to buy from.
Okay. Yeah,
there's no JD Sports for ethical and sustainable sportswear.
Okay, yeah.
So I started speaking to a lot of friends who are like yummy mummies and saying, well, why aren't you buying your leggings from somewhere that you know is ethical and sustainable rather than from Sweaty Betty or Lululemon. Lululemon to normal people, but and they were like, where from? Because there's lots of small brands out there, but you don't know whether they're ethical, whether you'll ever get your goods. And the more I got into it, the more I discovered that people like Nike and Adidas are having to be really careful, because by them saying, hey, look at this lovely sustainable pair of leggings we've made, they're actually saying that their other 999,000 products
they get questioned on everything else. Okay, yeah, so they can't be that initial market leader. Yeah.
Yes. So we are setting up the JD Sports version of sustainable and ethical sportswear.
Very exciting.
It's called Air Active, and it's other people's brands that we're helping to get them some voice, because we've effectively created a trusted brand.
Brilliant. And you got the packaging down?
I've got the packaging.
Got the distribution down?
Yeah. We just need the customers.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, that's really exciting and really different. So are you eventually thinking you'll kind of step fully into that and hand over the reins on the other ones?
No.
No.
But it's really funny because I'm not from a clothing background or anything, and talking to people, they're like, oh, you're working in fashion. I'm like, no, it's just a commodity, it's just like boxes, but it's leggings, so I'm coming at it from a very different...
Yeah. Interesting. And I guess a lot of the kind of boutique, smaller companies that started were more like fashion focused, so they weren't specifically focusing on being, the big brand for everybody. So yeah, that different angle. Okay. We might talk about that a bit more, but what I really wanted to ask you was around, you do a bit of advising for founders now.
Yeah.
With the rest of the time that you have left over after your other 4 businesses.
Yeah.
What made you get into that, and do you just do it like ad hoc, or?
My husband's got a lot to answer for.
Okay.
He really does. We were at a craft fair before the pandemic, and there was a lady that had just started her candle business, and I was looking at her stall, and I said, oh, how is it going? She said, oh, it's my first day, it's my first business. I said, oh, that's exciting. And I was like, well, good luck, and walked off. And my husband gave me a bit of a bollocking. He said, why didn't you stay and chat to her? I said, well, what am I going to do? Say you're the big I am, well, look at me. I said, I'm not like that, that's not who I am. And he said, no, but if you'd have spent some time with her and said, well, actually, I started up on my own, just doing it, and now I have grown it. And he said, so you inspire other people and tell them that or show them that there is a route to do that, starting from nothing. He said, you know, especially coming from such an unusual background. And so off the back of that, I started the Tiny Clinics, and the Tiny Clinic is anybody from any business can book a clinic, and it can be about anything. It doesn't need to be about packaging, it can be about finance, marketing, and they get a half-hour Zoom or, you know, of whatever they want to talk about.
That's so nice.
So we do that every Thursday.
Okay.
And today we actually had a strategy meeting about starting a drop-in clinic, where anybody, again, from any small business, because the one-to-one clinics are quite formal, but if we just have a drop-in centre, so if they're just having a bad day, or they're feeling lonely or whatever on their business journey, then they can just come to our drop-in centre.
That's nice.
Virtually or...
Yeah, especially when founders are on their own, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of founders talk about how, you know, even obviously you've got friends that you can talk to, but it's kind of like talking to somebody else who's been in that position and done it, that you can really just...
I don't know if other people experience the same as me. My best friends, one of them is quite high up in the NHS, a programme director type person. Another one works for Google as an account director, and another one works for Annexter, like cabling, again at a senior level. So when I set up my business, they had no idea what I was talking about. When I said, oh, I've reached £1 million turnover, they're all going, oh, great. Because, you know, a Google deal's 20 million quid, you know. And when you say, well, it's really lonely, well, what have you got to be lonely about? You know, it's cushy. And when you say, oh, I'm so busy, well, what are you busy with? You're only turning over 20,000 a year, you know, in the early days. Yeah. Well, it's because I'm doing the marketing and the finance and making the product, and people just don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so great what you're doing with the Tiny Clinics. I love the name. We'll have to share that with people if there's still availability.
Yeah.
Great. So I was going to ask you about your plans for Tiny Box Company in the future, but I guess kind of veering into the different strands that you need to grow. But is Tiny Box Company itself changing, do you think, in the future? Massively,
yeah. We've really kind of reached a crossroads where we need to start doing a lot more manufacturing ourselves. The time delays of bringing goods in from abroad have got so long. The market is fast-paced, and we need to be offering more to our customers in the form of manufacturing and choice.
Brilliant.
It's scary. I've never manufactured anything.
Well, you're about to do a lot of it. Great. So one last question from me, and then we'll go over to questions from the audience. So have a think about what you guys want to ask Rachel. Kind of a general question, but I think with everything you've been through, it's much needed. I just wanted to ask what your kind of top, couple of tips of advice would be to people that are just starting out or just thinking about, going through that whole journey themselves. And obviously everyone has different backgrounds and different skills, but is there, what kind of wisdom can you impart in terms of what people should absolutely make sure they think about or do or develop in?
So, one of my friends who I met through one of the Natwest Entrepreneur of the Year award, she's a doctor, and she trained as a, intensive care doctor and A&E. And through COVID, she was working at the Norfolk and Norwich, and she was working Friday nights, Saturday nights, Sunday nights, doing her 36 hours doctoring, and then Monday to Friday set up her own business.
Wow, okay.
The reason I'm talking about her is because she taught me a lesson. She was 27 years old, and I said to her, okay, what's your plans for the business? She said, it's going to be 3 billion in 5 years. I was like, wow. And what she taught me is that in my head, I still didn't necessarily have limiting beliefs, but she taught me that actually I do. And the only thing that limits us is our own perception. And actually, if you want to be like the next Facebook leader or whatever, then why not? Because the only person stopping you is you. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say is that most of us are so busy talking ourselves out of stuff than actually doing it. And I don't know if anyone's come across Mel Robbins.
Yeah.
She's got the 5-second rule, where you give yourself 5 seconds to action what you've just thought was a good idea, and you're not allowed to talk yourself out of it. You've got to just do it within those 5 seconds, because any longer, and then our bodies and our brains are wired to protect us, and anything that's change, the mind thinks is fearful. Mm-hmm. So it will purposely talk you out to protect you, and it's learning to switch that off and saying, well, I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. Right, everyone remember that. Okay, thank you so much. Right, let's go over to questions.
So as like a founder of a startup, lots of people look to external support or advice from things like accountants or website designers. If you reverse time, what external support would you seek out that you didn't in the first place?
So this is one of the most painful lessons I've learned, and that is that when you start out, you trust that external experts are going to know more than you, and actually half the time they don't. So it's taking on board what they say, thinking, do they really know what they're talking about? And if you doubt it at all, don't waste your money. When I first started Tinybox, this is before Dragon's Den, I went to an Investor Ready meeting with Business Connect, which was a government funded thing back then, and I sat with 3 experts, and I did the whole pitch to them and said, you know, this is what business is going to look like. And they looked at me and said, well, we don't think that you've got a viable business model. You've got no USP. And I'm going, but it's sustainable packaging. Yeah, there's no USP. So I said, okay, how do I need to change it or pivot it to have something unique? And I'm not joking. The guy sat back, looked at me and said, well, if I knew that, I'd be in business and not standing here or sitting here recommending or talking to you. I'm like, well, that's really helpful, thank you. But my point is that if I'd listened to him, Tinybox would never have existed. I absolutely believe that you should be working with external people where they can do a better job than you, because one of the harsh things about being an entrepreneur, I hate that word, is being able to recognise your own weaknesses. I am so crap at procedure. So I have to make sure that I have other people around me that bring in structure and procedure. So if you know numbers are really not your strong point, don't even try and waste your time doing it, because you're better off spending your time at what you're good at and letting go, but just finding people that you can work with and that you know are the best in their field.
Great shares, thank you, great questions, thank you. My question is, so if you're kind of aiming for the stars, as you were saying this, young woman was, would you have some advice from your experience about what's a kind of key area to focus on which kind of can create the exponential sort of growth? Because clearly you've grown very well, and there's certain things which will help you more than others.
I can't remember who said it, but one of the famous celebrities said there's no such thing as overnight success. And that is so true. So if I was to give anyone any advice here of how to get that exponential growth, it's putting in systems that give you a really solid foundation. So for example, if your aim is within 5 years to grow from 0 to 5 million, making sure that your accounting system, your infrastructure around your business can cope with that growth. And then making sure that you've got a really firm customer base, so that if it all does go tits up, you've still got that strong foundation behind you. So it's the building blocks to start with. So for example, if you're doing e-commerce, making sure that your e-commerce front end talks to your back end and you're not rekeying in all the invoices or whatever, you know. It's making sure that the systems are in place and that the structure that you develop is expandable. So, for example, you've got a sales director. What happens if your sales director leaves? You've got an accountant. What happens if they leave? What's your succession plan? What's your expansion route? So it's having that in mind the whole journey.
Hello, thank
Hello.
you so much both for the talk. You mentioned earlier on that if you, well, it would be too hard to say now if you would go back and do Dragon's Den again. Are there any real easy go back in time sliding door moments that you would like to revisit if you could, and why?
Back in 2015, we knew that we wanted to do manufacturing. We put together a whole business plan. We got a grant, a very small grant, but a grant from the Manufacturing Advisory Service just to check, give it a reality check that I wasn't just being overly enthusiastic. And they said, no, the numbers stuck up completely. We got offered a grant, a loan from East Sussex Council for £100,000 match funding with 0 interest. And we got cold feet and said no. In hindsight, what were we thinking? In hindsight, we should have said, great, let's do this, you know. But it was one of those classic things where we talked ourselves out of it because the business was growing very rapidly, and listened to that brain going, you know, oh, you don't know anything about manufacturing, you know, is this the right thing to do? My dad had leukemia at the time as well, so we were dealing with that. But yeah, if I could go back, I would probably have a different outcome.
5-second rule.
5-second rule, exactly.
So I'll follow up on that last question. So I was surprised when you said you've done the analysis looking back and you're still unsure whether the dragons added that value to get you to where you are. So I mean, what if they were here, or what they often say on the show is it's like, well, you're giving away 40%, but it's 40% of nothing, right?
Yeah.
So can you remember like how many doors were opened because you had that dragon's backing? Did you get contracts on the back of it? Were you plastering over all your promotional materials? Like how much of a kickstart did it give you back?
The first year of trading, we turned over £64,000. We got the funding, so our financial year ran from November to 31st of October, and it was aired mid-September. So I'd nearly finished my first financial year, as I say, 64k. The night we aired, we were told our website would hold up. It didn't, it crashed. If you ever decide to do Dragon's Den or anything like it, whatever they tell you about your website being resilient enough is bullshit. It was down in seconds. And I remember describing the whole journey as being like on a black ski slope and not being able to ski, because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And it was relentless. The calls coming through, the people wanting to talk to us, a lot of them time wasters. I mean, one guy turned up at my dad's house with jewellery made out of dead people's hair for me. That's that's how random it gets. But by the end of year 2, we had grown to about 250k turnover. So yes, it helped massively in credibility. I wouldn't say that we got any contracts directly off the back of it, but it allowed us to go 4 times bigger in a year. Had I known what I was doing and had a bit more confidence, we could have probably made a much bigger success out of it. But I was naive.
Just on that, so did Theo and Peter still own 40% of your business?
No, they own 44.
How's that?
Because after we'd done the deal with the Dragons, because Robin Banks had said he wanted to come out of it, he ended up with 9%, I had 56%, no, I had 51%, and the Dragons had 20% each. But then the company bought out Robin's 9%, which meant by default, their shareholding went up by 4% between them. Yeah, very unfortunate.
It's so interesting to hear your approach, and I'm going to ask you how you handle everything really. When you've got so many balls in the air and so many plates spinning, how do you prevent yourself from getting overwhelmed, and how do you find the time to sort of carve out big strategy picture stuff rather than getting like absorbed in day-to-day minutiae?
Can you ask my husband? We were talking, because we just come back from Scotland, and we were talking on the way home about where we wanted to go next, and I said, well, we need to decide between us what we want out of life and our strategy. And he said, therein lies the difference, Rachel. He said, I'm happy coming home in the evening and just watching TV and just relaxing. Whereas me, I'm on the treadmill, I'm reading books. What keeps me going is the constant looking forward and the constant possibilities and the sort of big picture strategizing of stuff. I'm not any good at the day-to-day stuff. That's my weakness, which is why I have to surround myself with people that can do it. So it's having all the plates spinning that excites me and keeps me going. And sometimes they do crash around me, and other people have to sort of help me clear up the mess. But I just thrive on constantly doing stuff, I guess. And I have learnt to start meditating every night, half an hour before I go to bed, to just kind of slow the brain down. But also, I am a great believer in manifestation and visualization. I don't know if anyone's heard of Hayley Sparks. She is I don't want to say Z-level because that sounds mean. She's a less well-known presenter on TV, but she used to be on This Morning. But at the start of 2021, she'd had a really bad 2020, and at the start of 2021, similar to me, she'd ended up staying back at the parents and her life going completely Pete Tong. But she created a vision board of exactly where she wanted to go, and she started trying to manifest that vision board. And a year later, everything pretty much has come to fruition. She did a podcast last week that you can hear, and it came to light so much that it even freaked her out. So, for example, she was an ambassador for the Pink Ribbon charity. She was also involved in a clothing company called Blue Vanilla. She was selling their products, or the influencer for their brand. But she put them next to each other on the vision board. And it was only at the end of the year that she looked back at it and she was like, Christ, without me even realising, the two are now collaborating. Because her brain had obviously processed and made real what she was seeing on the board, even though it had never passed her own consciousness.
And you did a bit of visualization yourself, just thought it would be interesting for you to share.
Yeah.
You told me about that the other day.
What was that?
About that you wanted to do more speaking things.
Oh, yeah. So in August, I had to have a hysterectomy. And it was fine, it was a routine operation. And in the past, I've never taken any time off. I was like, I'm going to have the 6 weeks off. So for the first 2 weeks, I did exactly what the doctor said, and then I was like, bored now. So I started visualizing and keeping a journal of my visualization journey. And I was like, okay, so what would I like to do? I was like, I know, I'd like to start doing more public speaking events, because if I can help other people on their journey, that's got to be a good thing, right? The next day, I got a call from the Telegraph saying, we're doing a Women in Business event, would you come and speak at it? I was like, wow, that's not even 24 hours. So it's staggering how it works. And I said, okay, I'd like to get involved in TV. And then the next thing I know, I'm invited onto GB News to do an interview on that. And none of it did I instigate other than in my visualization. It wasn't like I was reaching out and asking. It just all came to me.
So when you were first bringing people into your team, What were you prioritising when you started to bring those first people in? And sort of the second part, really, when you started to relinquish the control of hiring, how did you find that process? Did you find it easy to let go?
It's so weird. I tell you, I walk around the building, I'm like, who are you? Because we're you know, we are at about 100 staff now, and I walk into the warehouse, I'm like, do they work for us or are they a contractor? Or so it's really hard learning to let go. Going back to what I prioritised when I first started was basically, can I afford them? Who's the cheapest? I wouldn't recommend that strategy at all. Doesn't work. And actually it was my friend at Google who taught us a lot about that, where her first interview at Google was not even with the department that was hiring her. She was tested on her Googliness, honestly, and how she fitted into the culture. And it was only by passing her Googliness interview that she then got to the next levels to actually talk about the job. So we've started focusing on what our values are, what we stand for, what we want from the ideal employee. So for me, I don't really care whether they've got a degree, I don't really care whether they're blue, pink, yellow. It's the attitude, because if they've got the right attitude, you can teach them anything. But if they've got the job's worth mentality, or that's below me, or any kind of their own limiting beliefs, that for me is a no.
Great, we had some awesome questions. Thank
We
you
did have some
everyone
good questions, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for engaging everybody. Okay, I think that brings us to the end. We've covered so many things, and it's been so interesting. Rachel, your resilience is just so inspiring, and I've gotten so much out of this conversation, and I'm sure everybody else has. I have really loved chatting to you, and I feel like there's so much more we could talk about, and I really want to. But we'll share the details of all the stuff that you're doing, and tiny clinics?
Tiny clinics, yeah.
Like that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.